I have held many things in my hands throughout my life. I have held my mother's hand when I was small, crossing the street on rainy mornings. I have held flowers at her funeral. I have held my own children close to my chest and whispered promises into their tiny ears. But nothing has ever felt as heavy as a single folded piece of paper. It was a letter, old, yellowed at the edges, the creases so deep that the paper had started to tear along the folds. Someone had opened it and closed it many, many times over the years. Someone had read those words again and again, in secret, probably in the dark, probably while crying. That someone was my mother. And when I finally read that letter myself, standing alone in her empty bedroom 3 weeks after we buried her, I felt the ground shift beneath me. Not in a dramatic way, not like in the movies. It was quieter than that. It was like discovering that the house you grew up in had a room you never knew about. A locked door you walked past every single day of your life without ever noticing. The letter told me something I was never supposed to know. It told me I had a sister. A real, living, breathing sister. Not a cousin, not a distant relative. A sister. Born from the same mother who tucked me in at night. Born from the same father who taught me to ride a bicycle in our driveway. They told me I was an only child. They told me that for 41 years, and I believed them. Why wouldn't I? They were my parents. They were the people I trusted most in this world. But they lied. And standing there in that quiet bedroom, with the smell of my mother's lavender lotion still hanging in the air, I didn't know what to feel. I wasn't angry. Not yet. I wasn't sad. Not exactly. I was something else. Something I still don't have a word for. I was lost, in my own story, in my own family, in my own life. This is what happened. And I want to tell you everything, not because it's easy, but because I think someone out there might need to hear it. My name is Claire. I grew up in a small town in the Midwest, the kind of town where everyone knows your name and your neighbors wave at you from their porches. Our house was a modest 2-story with white siding and green shutters. There was a big oak tree in the front yard and a small garden in the back where my mother grew tomatoes and sunflowers every summer. My father's name was David. He was a quiet man, not cold, just quiet. He worked at the local hardware store for over 30 years. He had big, rough hands from all the lifting and fixing, but those same hands were gentle when he helped me with my homework at the kitchen table. He wasn't the kind of father who said, "I love you" out loud, but he showed it in other ways. He showed it by being there, every morning, every evening, always in his chair, always steady. My mother's name was Margaret. Everyone called her Maggie. She was warmer than my father, more expressive. She laughed easily and cried easily, too. She was the kind of woman who would bake a pie for a neighbor she barely knew, just because she heard they were having a hard week. She sang while she cooked. She hummed while she folded laundry. And she read to me every single night until I was 10 years old and told her I was too grown up for bedtime stories. I remember the look on her face when I said that. She smiled, but her eyes were sad, like she was losing something she wasn't ready to let go of. Looking back now, I think my mother carried sadness the way some people carry purses, always with her, tucked close, never putting it down. I just didn't see it clearly when I was young. Children don't always notice the weight their parents are carrying. We just see the smile. We just hear the laughter. We don't think to ask what's behind it. I was their only child. That was the story. That was what I was told. "You were our miracle," my mother used to say, brushing my hair at night. "We tried for so long, and then you came, our one perfect gift." I liked that story. It made me feel special. Chosen, even, like the universe picked me specifically to belong to this little family. But being an only child also meant being lonely sometimes. I remember watching other kids at school with their brothers and sisters. I watched them argue over silly things during lunch. I watched them walk home together, pushing each other off the sidewalk and laughing. I watched them share inside jokes that no one else understood. And I wanted that. I wanted it so badly. I went to college 2 hours away from home. I studied education because I loved children and I loved learning. I met a kind man named Thomas during my junior year. He was studying engineering. He had a loud laugh and a gentle heart, and he came from a big family, 4 brothers and 2 sisters. I loved going to his family's house for holidays. It was chaotic, loud, messy, beautiful. People talked over each other. Kids ran through the hallways. Someone was always cooking and someone else was always eating. There were arguments, sure, but they were resolved quickly, usually with a hug or a joke or a plate of food pushed across the table. I remember sitting at their Thanksgiving table one year, surrounded by all those people and feeling tears prick my eyes. Not because I was sad, because I was overwhelmed by how full that room was, how alive it felt, and I thought about my parents' quiet house, our small table set for 3, the silence between bites. Thomas and I got married when I was 25. We had 2 children, a boy named Daniel and a girl named Sophie. I wanted them to have each other. I wanted them to never feel that quiet loneliness I had felt growing up. And watching them together, fighting over toys, whispering secrets, holding hands when they were scared, I knew I had given them something I never had. My parents loved being grandparents, my mother especially. She would drive the 2 hours to our house every other weekend just to hold the bobbies. She would sit in the rocking chair with Sophie on her lap, humming the same songs she used to hum to me, and her face would soften in a way I hadn't seen in years. Like the sadness lifted, just for a little while. My father was proud in his quiet way. He built Daniel a wooden toy chest with his own hands. He carved the boy's name into the lid. It wasn't fancy, but it was made with love, and Daniel kept it until he was a teenager. We were a good family. We were close. We visited. We called. We showed up for each other. But there were things I didn't notice. Or maybe I noticed but didn't understand. There were small things, little moments that didn't make sense at the time but stayed with me anyway, like pebbles in the bottom of a shoe. You keep walking, you adjust, but you feel them with every step. The first thing I remember is the room. At the end of the upstairs hallway in my parents' house, there was a door that was always closed. When I was little, I asked my mother what was behind it. Just storage, she said. Old boxes, dusty things, nothing interesting. I tried the handle once. It was locked. I asked where the key was. Lost it years ago, my father said, not looking up from his newspaper. Don't worry about it. So I didn't. Children trust their parents. Children accept their answers and move on to the next question. But now and then, I would walk past that door and notice something. A faint smell of lavender, the same lotion my mother wore. Sometimes, when I came home from school early, I would hear the door close quickly, followed by footsteps. My mother would appear at the top of the stairs a moment later, smiling. "You're home early," she would say, and her voice would be a little too bright, a little too cheerful, like she was covering something. I told myself it was nothing. Storage rooms exist. Locked doors exist. Not everything is a mystery. But the door was never opened. Not once in all the years I lived in that house. And after I moved out, I simply forgot about it. Life was full. My children were growing. My days were busy with lesson plans and school events and Thomas's work schedule and laundry and dinners, and all the beautiful ordinary things that fill up a life so completely you don't have time to think about old locked doors. The second thing I remember is the phone calls. My mother talked on the phone a lot. She had friends. She had her church group. She chatted with neighbors and relatives. That was normal. But sometimes, maybe once a month, sometimes more, she would take a call differently. She would see the number on the phone and her face would change. Not dramatically, not in a way you would catch unless you were watching closely, but her lips would press together just slightly. Her eyes would flicker, and she would leave the room. She would close the kitchen door behind her, or step out onto the back porch, or walk to the far end of the yard near the fence. And she would talk quietly, so quietly I could never hear the words. When she came back, her eyes would sometimes be red. "Are you okay, Mom?" I asked once when I was about 15. "Allergies," she said. "The pollen is terrible this year." It was November. There was no pollen. But I let it go, because that's what we do with the people we love. We let things go. We give them the benefit of the doubt. We tell ourselves that everyone is entitled to their private moments, their private tears, their private phone calls. The third thing I remember is the photograph. This one is harder to explain, because it happened so quickly and was never mentioned again. I was home from college for winter break. I was 20, maybe 21. I was sitting in the living room, flipping through an old photo album, the kind with the sticky pages and the clear plastic covers that peel back. Most of the photos were ones I had seen before. My parents on their wedding day, my father as a young man in the military, my mother holding me as a baby, birthday parties, Christmases, summer vacations. But then, near the back of the album, I found a photo that was different. It was a small picture, slightly out of focus. It showed my mother sitting in what looked like a hospital bed. She was younger than I had ever seen her, maybe 19 or 20. Her hair was different, longer, darker. She was holding something in her arms, a bundle wrapped in a white blanket. A baby. But the photo wasn't from my birth. I knew that because my father had shown me my birth photos many times and they looked different. Different hospital, different gown, different everything. "Mom," I said, holding up the photo, "what's this?" She was across the room, folding towels. She looked up, and I saw something I had never seen in my mother's eyes before. Fear. It was there for just a flash. Then it was gone, replaced by that familiar warm smile. She walked over, took the photo from my hand, and looked at it for a long moment. "Oh, that's nothing," she said softly. "That's a friend's baby. I was visiting her in the hospital. We were so young then." She laughed lightly. "I can't even remember her name now." She slid the photo into her pocket and changed the subject. And I let it go, again. But that night, lying in my childhood bed, I thought about her eyes, that flash of fear. It didn't match the story she told. You don't get afraid when someone asks about a friend's baby from 20 years ago. I thought about it for a few days, and then life pulled me forward the way it always does. Exams, graduation, Thomas, the wedding, the bobbies, the years. I let it go. I let it all go. The years moved the way years do, slowly when you're living them, and impossibly fast when you look back. My father retired from the hardware store when he was 65. He spent his days in the garage, building birdhouses and small shelves he would give to anyone who visited. He grew quieter with age, but his eyes were still warm, still steady. My mother continued her routines, cooking, gardening, church on Sundays, phone calls with friends. But I noticed that as she got older, the sadness I had always sensed in her became harder to hide. She would drift off mid-conversation sometimes, staring out the window at nothing. She would hold my children a little too tightly, a little too long, like she was afraid they might disappear. "Mom, are you all right?" I asked her once, when we were sitting on her back porch watching the sun go down. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "There are things I wish I had done differently, Claire." "Like what?" She shook her head slowly. "It doesn't matter now. What's done is done." "You can tell me," I said, "whatever it is." She looked at me then, really looked at me, and for a moment I thought she was going to say something. Her lips parted, her eyes filled with something deep and old and painful. But then she smiled, that same smile, that beautiful, heartbreaking, hiding everything smile. "I'm just getting sentimental in my old age," she said. "Don't mind me." I reached over and held her hand. Her fingers were thinner than I remembered, frailer. Time was taking pieces of her, little by little, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. She squeezed my hand and whispered, "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Claire. I need you to know that." "I know, Mom." "No," she said, and her voice cracked just slightly. "I need you to really know it, no matter what. No matter what you ever learn or hear or find out, you were wanted, you were loved, from the very first moment." I didn't understand what she meant. Not then. I thought she was just being emotional. Mothers get emotional, especially as they get older, especially when the light is soft and golden and the evening is quiet. I didn't ask her to explain. I wish I had. My mother was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in the spring, 3 years ago. By the time they found it, it had already spread. The doctors were honest with us. They said months, not years. Those months were the hardest of my life. I drove to my parents' house every week. Sometimes I stayed for days. Thomas took over everything at home so I could be there. Daniel was in college by then, and Sophie was finishing high school. They came when they could. We all came when we could. My mother handled the illness with a grace I still don't fully understand. She didn't complain. She didn't cry, at least not in front of us. She continued to hum while I helped her move from the bed to the chair by the window. She still asked about the children. She still wanted to hear about my students, my garden, my plans for the summer. But she was fatting, day by day, like a photograph left in the sun. My father was lost. He didn't know how to exist in a world where Maggie was leaving. He sat beside her bed for hours, not speaking, just holding her hand. Sometimes I would find him in the garage, standing in front of his workbench, tools untouched, staring at nothing. "Dad," I said one evening, finding him there, "you should eat something." He looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. "She's the strong one, Claire. She's always been the strong one. I don't know how to do this without her." "You won't have to do it alone," I said. "I'm here." He nodded, but I could see that he was already beginning to disappear too, in his own way. My mother passed on a Tuesday morning in September. The leaves on the oak tree in the front yard had just begun to turn. The air was cool and smelled like earth and rain. I was holding her hand when she went. Her breathing had been slow and shallow all night, and then, just as the early light came through the window, it stopped. Gently, quietly, like the last note of a song you didn't want to end. I sat there for a long time after. I didn't move. I didn't cry. I just held her hand and looked at her face and tried to memorize every detail. The lines around her eyes, the softness of her skin, the way her lips curved upward slightly, even in death, as if she were still trying to smile. My father stood in the doorway. He didn't come closer. He just stood there, one hand on the doorframe, tears running silently down his face. We buried her 3 days later. The church was full. The whole town came. People brought food and flowers and stories about Maggie, how she helped them, how she made them laugh, how she always showed up when it mattered. And I stood beside her grave and thought about her words on the porch that evening. "No matter what you ever learn or hear or find out, you were wanted, you were loved." What did she mean? What was I going to find out? 3 weeks after the funeral, I went back to my parents' house to help my father sort through my mother's things. He wasn't ready to do it alone, and honestly, I needed to be there too. Being in her space, touching her things, it hurt, but it also felt like a way to be close to her one more time. We started with the easy things: clothes, shoes, the scarves she collected from every town she ever visited. We folded them carefully, sorted them into bags, some for donation, some to keep. My father worked slowly, touching each item like it was something sacred. A blue cardigan she wore every Sunday. A pair of gardening gloves with dirt still on the fingers. A small bottle of lavender lotion, half empty. "She wore this every day," he said, holding the lotion. His voice was barely above a whisper. "Every single day." "I know, Dad." He set it down gently on the dresser and left the room. I heard his footsteps on the stairs, slow and heavy, then the back door opening and closing. He needed air. He needed space. I continued alone. I worked through the dresser drawers, the nightstand, the shelf above the closet, and then I came to the closet itself. My mother's closet was small but neat. Dresses hung in a row, organized by color. Shoes were lined up on the floor, and on the top shelf, pushed to the very back, there were 3 cardboard boxes I had never seen before. They were dusty, taped shut, no labels. I pulled down the first one. Inside were old greeting cards, birthday cards, anniversary cards, Mother's Day cards I had made as a child. I smiled at the crayon drawings and the misspelled words. She kept everything, every single one. The second box was full of documents: insurance papers, tax records, the deed to the house, normal things, adult things, boring things. The third box was different. It was smaller than the others, lighter, and the tape on it was different, newer, like it had been opened and resealed more recently than the rest. I sat on the edge of my mother's bed and opened it. Inside there were several items: a tiny knitted hat, the kind you put on a newborn. It was white with a small pink ribbon. A hospital bracelet, so small it could only have fit around a baby's wrist. A few more photographs, the same era as the one I had found in the album years ago. My mother, young and tired, holding a baby. And at the bottom of the box, there was a letter. It was in an envelope. The envelope was plain white, no stamp, no address. Just a name written on the front in my mother's handwriting. The name was Ruth. My hands were shaking. I don't know why. I didn't know what the letter said yet. I didn't know who Ruth was, but something inside me, some deep, wordless instinct, knew that this was the thing. This was the secret. This was what my mother had been carrying all those years. I opened the envelope. The letter was written on lined paper, in my mother's careful handwriting. The ink was faded in places, darker in others, like it had been written over several days, or maybe several attempts. This is what the letter said. I'm going to read it to you as closely as I can to how my mother wrote it, because her words deserve to be heard exactly as she put them down. My dearest Ruth asterisk, I have started this letter so many times. I have thrown away more versions than I can count. But I need to write it, even if you never read it, because the weight of keeping silent is breaking me. You were born on March 14th, 1971. You came into this world early in the morning, just as the sun was coming up. You were so small, so perfect. You had dark hair and the tiniest fingers I had ever seen. You held onto my pinky, and I thought my heart would stop from the love I felt. I was 18 years old. Your father, David, was 19. We weren't married yet. We weren't ready. My parents, your grandparents, they said we couldn't keep you. They said it would ruin everything. Our reputations, our futures, our lives. I begged them. I begged on my knees. I told them I could do it. I told them I would work 3 jobs if I had to. I told them I would find a way. But they wouldn't listen. And David's parents agreed with mine. They all said the same thing. You're too young, you'll have more children later. This is for the best. The baby will go to a good family. She'll have a better life. They made the arrangements before I even left the hospital. A couple from another town. Good people, they said. A nice home, stable, loving. They took you from my arms on the second day. A nurse came in and said it was time. I held you tighter. I said no. I said please. I said she's mine. But my mother was there, and she put her hand on my shoulder and said, Maggie, let go. It's the only way. And I let go. I let go of you, Ruth, and I have never forgiven myself. David and I got married 2 years later. We tried to move on. We tried to build the life everyone said we were supposed to have. And when Claire came along, your sister, Ruth, your little sister, I poured everything into her. Every ounce of love I had, including the love I had been saving for you. But I never forgot you, not for one single day. I have thought about you every morning when I wake up and every night before I sleep. I have wondered what you look like, what your voice sounds like, whether you're happy, whether you're loved. I have wanted to find you. So many times I have come close. I found the agency. I made calls. But every time I stopped, because I was afraid that you would hate me, afraid that you would ask me why, and I don't have a good enough answer. There is no good enough answer for giving away your child. Claire doesn't know about you. David and I decided, or maybe I decided, and David went along with it, the way he always does, that it was better not to tell her. I didn't want her to look at me differently. I didn't want her to know that her mother was the kind of woman who gave away a baby. But I'm writing this now because I'm getting older and I feel time closing in. And I want someone to know the truth. I want it written down somewhere. I want it to exist outside of my own heart, where it has been locked away for so long. Ruth, if you ever read this, if by some miracle these words find their way to you, please know this. I loved you. I loved you from the first moment I felt you move inside me. I loved you when I held you. I loved you when they took you away. And I have loved you every day since. I am sorry. I am so deeply, endlessly sorry. Your mother, asterisk. Margaret. I don't remember how long I sat there. It could have been 5 minutes. It could have been an hour. Time stopped meaning anything. The room was perfectly still. The only sound was my own breathing, which had become shallow and strange, like I had forgotten how to do it properly. I had a sister. Her name was Ruth. She was born 3 years before me. She was real. She existed. She had been held by my mother, loved by my mother, and then taken away from my mother. And no one told me. For 41 years, no one told me. I read the letter again, and again. Each time a different line hit me differently. Each time a new wave of something, grief, disbelief, sadness, confusion, washed through me. Your sister, Ruth, your little sister. Those words, your sister. I had a sister. I had always had a sister. And while I was growing up feeling lonely, feeling like something was missing, she was out there somewhere living her own life, probably wondering about her own story, probably carrying her own unanswered questions. I thought about all those moments over the years. The locked room, the phone calls, the photograph, my mother's sadness, her words on the porch. No matter what you ever learn or hear or find out, you were wanted, you were loved. She was trying to tell me. In her own way, in her own time, she was trying to prepare me. But she ran out of time. I folded the letter carefully and put it back in the envelope. I placed it on the bed beside me and looked at the other items in the box. The tiny knitted hat, the hospital bracelet, the photographs. In one of the photos, my mother was smiling, a real smile, not the hiding kind. She was looking down at the baby in her arms with such pure, unguarded love that it made my chest ache. This was before the grief, before the guilt, before the years of silence. This was a mother holding her firstborn child. And then I realized something that made me cry harder than anything else. The locked room. I stood up. My legs felt weak, but I walked to the hallway. I walked to the end, to the door that had been closed my entire life. I tried the handle. It opened. Someone, my mother, I assumed, had unlocked it. Maybe recently. Maybe before she got sick. Maybe she wanted me to find it eventually, the same way she wanted me to find the letter. The room was small, smaller than I expected. It had a single window with white curtains. The walls were painted a soft pink, and inside there was a crib. An old wooden crib, carefully maintained, with a white blanket folded neatly inside it. On the small shelf beside the crib there was a stuffed animal, a rabbit with long, floppy ears, worn soft from years of being held. And there were more photographs, framed this time, hanging on the wall. Photographs of a baby girl, Ruth. My mother had kept this room for over 40 years. She had preserved it exactly as it was. She had come in here, that's what the footsteps were, that's what the closed door and the lavender scent were about. She had come in here to sit with her grief. To be close to the child she gave away, to remember. I stood in the doorway of that little pink room, and I wept. Not just for my mother, not just for Ruth, but for all the years of silence, all the years of pretending, all the love that had nowhere to go except into a locked room at the end of a hallway. I went downstairs and found my father in the backyard. He was sitting in the old lawn chair, staring at my mother's garden. The tomato plants were brown and dry. No one had watered them since she got sick. I sat down beside him. I didn't say anything for a long time. I just sat there, letting the silence stretch between us, feeling the weight of everything I now knew. Finally, I spoke. "Dad." He turned his head slowly to look at me. "Who is Ruth?" The color drained from his face. It was like watching someone age 10 years in a single moment. His mouth opened, then closed. His hands gripped the armrests of the chair. "Where did you?" he started, but his voice trailed off. He already knew. He knew I had found the letter. He knew the secret was no longer a secret. "The closet," I said quietly. "The box, the letter Mom wrote." He closed his eyes and leaned his head back. A long, shaking breath left his body. "I told her," he whispered. "I told her so many times that we should tell you, that you deserve to know. But you didn't." "No," he opened his eyes. They were wet. "Because your mother was afraid, and I couldn't bear to cause her more pain than she was already in. She carried so much guilt, Claire, you have no idea, it ate her alive." "Tell me," I said. "Tell me everything." And he did. He told me about the spring of 1971. He and my mother were high school sweethearts. They were young. They were in love. And when my mother got pregnant, they were terrified. Not because they didn't want the baby, they did, but because the world around them said they couldn't have it. Both sets of grandparents decided the baby would be given up for adoption. It wasn't a discussion. It was a decision. My mother fought it. She fought hard. But she was 18 and alone, and the pressure from both families was overwhelming. "She cried for weeks after they took the baby," my father said. "I had never seen anyone cry like that. It was like something inside her broke and never healed." They got married 2 years later. They tried to build a life. They tried to be normal. And when I came along, my mother poured herself into being the best mother she could possibly be, partly out of love for me, and partly, my father admitted, out of guilt for Ruth. "She loved you more than anything," he said. "But she never stopped loving Ruth. She just couldn't talk about it. Every time she tried, the grief would swallow her whole." The phone calls, he explained, were from the adoption agency. Over the years, my mother had stayed in touch with them, hopping for updates, hoping that Ruth might one day try to find her biological parents. Sometimes the agency would call with news, not much, just small pieces. Ruth was healthy. Ruth was doing well in school. Ruth was adopted by a loving family. These crumbs of information were all my mother had, and she held on to them like they were oxygen. Did she ever try to contact Ruth directly? I asked. My father shook his head. She wanted to, many times, but she was afraid of rejection, afraid of disrupting Ruth's life, afraid of everything. And the pink room upstairs. His face crumbled. She set that up right after we moved into this house. She said she needed a place for Ruth, even though Ruth wasn't here, even though Ruth might never come. She needed a place that was hers. We sat in silence for a while. The rain had started light and steady, tapping on the leaves of the oak tree. "Dad," I said softly, "I need to find her." He looked at me for a long time. Then he nodded slowly. "I know," he said. "Your mother would want that." Finding Ruth was not easy. It took time. Months, actually. I started with the adoption agency my father mentioned. They were cooperative but cautious. Privacy laws are strict, and they couldn't just hand over information. I had to file requests, fill out forms, prove my identity, prove my relationship. Thomas was my rock during this time. He held me when I cried. He sat with me when I stared at the wall. He reminded me to eat when I forgot. He told me again and again that I was doing the right thing. "She's your sister, Claire," he said one night when I was lying in bed, exhausted and discouraged. "She deserves to know, and you deserve to know her." Daniel and Sophie were supportive too, in their own ways. Daniel, who was always the quiet, thoughtful one, said something that stayed with me. "Mom, think about it this way," he said. "Grandma kept that room for 40 years. She never let go. That means the love is still there. It's just waiting." Sophie cried when I told her. She's sensitive like my mother. She cried, and then she said, "I have an aunt I've never met. That's the saddest and most beautiful thing I've ever heard." After 4 months of paperwork and waiting and hopping, I got a call from the agency. Ruth had registered with them years ago. She had been looking too. She had been searching for her biological family, off and on, for over a decade. She wanted to be found. When the agency told me this, I broke down. Right there on the phone, I couldn't speak. I couldn't breathe. She wanted to be found. She had been looking for us too. They gave me her contact information, an email address, and a phone number. She lived in Oregon. She was a nurse. She was married. She had 3 children. I sat with that phone number for 2 days. I looked at it. I held my phone in my hand. I started to dial and then stopped, over and over. What would I say? How do you introduce yourself to a sister you didn't know you had? How do you explain 41 years of silence? On the 3rd day, I called. The phone rang 4 times. Each ring felt like an eternity. And then a voice answered. A woman's voice, warm, a little uncertain. "Hello." "Hi," I said. My voice was shaking. "Is this Ruth?" "Yes, who is this?" I took a breath, the deepest breath of my life. "My name is Claire. I think I'm your sister." Silence. Long, long silence. And then I heard her crying. Soft, quiet crying, not sad crying. The kind of crying that happens when something you've been waiting your whole life for finally arrives. "I've been hopping for this call," she whispered. "I've been hopping for so long." We talked on the phone for 3 hours that first time. 3 hours. We laughed. We cried. We told each other about our lives, trading stories like children swapping cards on a playground. Ruth told me about her adoptive parents, George and Linda. They were wonderful people. Kind, stable, loving. They told Ruth early on that she was adopted, and they always supported her curiosity about her biological family. "I never felt unloved," Ruth said. "My parents, my adoptive parents, they gave me a beautiful life. But there was always this piece missing. This question I couldn't answer. Who was the woman who gave birth to me? Why did she let me go? Did she ever think about me?" "Every day," I said, tears streaming down my face. "She thought about you every single day." I told Ruth about the letter. I read it to her over the phone, word by word. And I heard her weeping on the other end of the line, deep, releasing sobs that sounded like they had been locked away for years, just like my mother's secret. "She loved me," Ruth said when I finished reading. "She really loved me." "She really loved you," I confirmed. "More than you will ever know." We decided to meet. 3 weeks later, I flew to Oregon. I will never forget the moment I saw her. She was standing at the airport near the arrival gate. She was taller than me. Her hair was darker like my mother's had been in her youth. She had my father's eyes. Those same steady, quiet eyes. We stood there for a moment, just looking at each other. Two strangers who shared the same blood. Two women who should have grown up together, who should have fought over the bathroom and whispered secrets in the dark and held each other's hands during thunderstorms. 41 years. Gone, taken by fear and shame and silence. But we were here now. We were finally here. She took a step toward me. I took a step toward her. And then we were holding each other, right there in the middle of the airport, crying so hard that people stopped to look. Some of them smiled. Some of them cried too, even though they had no idea what was happening. They just saw two women holding each other like the world depended on it. And maybe it did. "I'm sorry," I whispered into her shoulder. "I'm sorry I didn't know." "It's not your fault," she said. "It's no one's fault, not anymore." We spent 5 days together. 5 extraordinary, overwhelming, heartbreaking, beautiful days. She showed me her home, her family. Her husband Mark was a quiet man, gentle and kind, like my father. Her children, 2 boys and a girl, were warm and curious and immediately fascinated by the idea of having a new aunt and cousins they didn't know about. We sat up late every night, talking. We compared our childhoods, looking for the places where our stories overlapped, the invisible threads that connected us even though we grew up in different homes, different states, different worlds. She told me she loved nursing. She loved taking care of people. She loved making them feel safe. "I wonder if I got that from her," she said. "From our mother, she sounds like she took care of everyone." "She did," I said. "She really did." I showed her the photographs from the box, the tiny hat, the hospital bracelet. She held each item carefully, reverently, like they were holy relics. "She kept all of this," Ruth whispered. "All these years." "She kept a whole room for you," I said. "A little pink room with a crib and a stuffed rabbit. She went in there to be close to you." Ruth closed her eyes. Tears ran down her cheeks. She held the tiny knitted hat against her chest and rocked slightly, the way you rock when the grief is too big for words. I wished, more than anything, that my mother could have been there. I wished she could have seen us sitting together. I wished she could have known that her 2 daughters, the one she raised and the one she gave away, had found each other. That the love she had been carrying in secret for 40 years had finally come full circle. But she was gone, and that is the part of this story that will always hurt. 6 months after we met, Ruth came to visit me. She came to the town where we both began, though she didn't remember it, having been taken from it when she was only 2 days old. I took her to the house, our parents' house. My father was nervous. He hadn't slept the night before. He paced the kitchen, straightening things that didn't need straightening, wiping counters that were already clean. "What if she's angry?" he said. "What if she doesn't want to see me?" "She wants to see you, Dad," I said. "She told me so." When Ruth walked through the front door, my father stood in the living room, trembling. He looked at her, really looked at her, and I watched the recognition wash over his face. He saw my mother in her. He saw himself. He saw the baby he had held for only 2 days before she was taken away. "Ruth," he said, just her name. That's all he could manage. She crossed the room and took his hands. She held them gently, the way a nurse holds a patient's hands, and she said, "Hello, Dad." He broke completely. He wept like a child. He pulled her into his arms and held her, and years, decades of guilt and grief and silence poured out of him in great, shaking sobs. "I'm sorry," he said over and over. "I'm so sorry. We should have been stronger. We should have fought harder. I should have." "It's okay," she said. "I'm here now. I'm here." They sat together for a long time. He told her about my mother, about how much she loved her, about the room, about the phone calls, about all the letters my mother wrote but never sent. And then I took Ruth upstairs, to the pink room. She stood in the doorway just as I had. She looked at the crib, the rabbit, the photographs on the wall. "She made this for me," Ruth said softly. "She made a place for me even though I wasn't here." "You were always here," I said. "In her heart, you were always here." Ruth picked up the stuffed rabbit. She held it to her face and breathed in. And then she smiled, not the hiding kind of smile. A real one, full and warm and bittersweet. "I wish I had known her," she said. "She would have loved knowing you," I said. "She would have loved everything about you." Later that day, we went to the cemetery. Ruth and I stood side by side at my mother's grave. We brought sunflowers, my mother's favorite, and laid them on the stone. Ruth knelt down and placed her hand on the grass above where my mother rested. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for loving me. Thank you for keeping that room. Thank you for writing that letter. I know it wasn't easy. None of it was easy. But I know now, I know you loved me, and that's enough." I stood behind her, my hand on her shoulder, and I cried. But they were different tears now, not the sharp, stunned tears of discovery. These were softer, warmer. They were the tears that come when something broken finally begins to heal. That was 2 years ago. Ruth and I talk every week now, sometimes every day. We send each other photos. We share recipes. She makes the most incredible bread, and I'm still trying to get mine to rise the way hers does. We laugh about the little things. We cry about the big things. We are making up for lost time the only way we know how, one conversation, one visit, one shared memory at a time. Our children have become close. Daniel and Ruth's oldest son, James, text each other constantly. Sophie and Ruth's daughter, Anna, are nearly inseparable when they're together. It's like watching the family that was always supposed to exist finally find its shape. My father is doing better. He is still quiet. He is still steady. But there is a lightness to him now that wasn't there before. Having Ruth in his life has lifted something from his shoulders, a burden he carried for over 40 years without ever speaking of it. He told me recently, sitting in his chair in the living room, that he thinks my mother is at peace now. "She can rest," he said. "Both of her girls are together, that's all she ever wanted." I think he's right. I have learned many things from this experience, things I didn't expect to learn, things that changed the way I see the world, my family, and myself. I learned that secrets don't protect people. They isolate them. My mother thought she was protecting me by keeping Ruth a secret, but all she was really doing was carrying the weight alone, and that weight crushed her, slowly, over decades. If she had told me, if she had trusted me with the truth, I could have helped her carry it. We could have searched for Ruth together. We could have found her sooner. I learned that fear is a terrible reason to stay silent. My mother was afraid of being judged, afraid of being seen as a woman who gave away her child. But she was not that woman. She was a girl, an 18-year-old girl who was pressured by everyone around her to make an impossible choice. She deserved compassion, not shame. And the shame she felt was never hers to carry. It belonged to a world that did not support her when she needed it most. I learned that love does not disappear just because people are separated. My mother loved Ruth from across the years, across the miles, across the silence. And Ruth, in her own way, loved the idea of her mother, the woman she had never met but always wondered about. Love does not need proximity. It does not need words. It exists in the spaces between heartbeats, in the prayers we whisper into the dark, in the rooms we keep ready for people who haven't come home yet. And I learned that it is never too late. I wish, oh, how I wish that my mother had been alive to meet Ruth. I wish she could have held her again. I wish she could have seen the woman Ruth became, kind, strong, graceful, beautiful. I wish she could have sat at our table during the holidays, surrounded by both her daughters, by grandchildren she never knew she had, by the full, noisy, messy, chaotic love of a big family. But even though she missed that, the love she planted reached us. The letter she wrote, the letter she probably never intended anyone to find, was the seed. And from that seed, a family grew. Sometimes I take the letter out and read it again. I sit by the window in the evening light, and I read my mother's words, and I feel her presence. Not like a ghost, not like a memory, like warmth, like the feeling you get when someone wraps a blanket around your shoulders on a cold night. She is still taking care of me. She is still taking care of Ruth. She is still here, in the love she left behind. If you are listening to this story, and you are keeping a secret, a big one, the kind that lives in your bones and keeps you up at night, I want you to know something. The people who love you can handle the truth. They are stronger than you think. And the truth, even when it is painful, is always kinder than silence. Tell your story, write the letter, open the door, unlock the room. Because on the other side of that door, there might be someone who has been waiting their whole life to find you. My name is Claire. I was told I was an only child, but I found a hidden letter and it gave me a sister. And even though the road to get here was long and full of tears, I wouldn't trade it for anything. Because Ruth is my family. She always was. I just didn't know it yet.